Everything moved fast in Pittsburgh the moment Mike McCarthy was officially introduced, and less than a day later, the direction of this team already started to become clearer. The Steelers did not waste time, and that alone tells you how intentional this transition is. The front office and McCarthy are acting with urgency, and the first major domino to fall was on the defensive side of the ball. Patrick Graham is in the process of being finalized as the next defensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and this is not a random name, not a panic move, and not a hire made just to fill a box. This is a calculated decision that says a lot about how McCarthy wants this team to evolve right now. Graham arrives with extensive experience as a defensive coordinator, having held that role with the Raiders for the past 3 seasons and previously with the Dolphins and Giants. He is 47 years old, has worked under multiple head coaches, and has been exposed to virtually every defensive structure you can imagine at the NFL level. One of the most important connections here is that Graham and McCarthy already crossed paths in Green Bay, where Graham coached linebackers during McCarthy's final season with the Packers. That familiarity matters. This is not the football minds meeting for the first time. There is history, trust, and a shared understanding of how to build a staff. What makes this hire especially intriguing for Steelers fans is not just Graham's resume, but the context of what he has been able to do throughout his career. Time and time again, Patrick Graham has been tasked with coordinating defenses that, on paper, lacked high-end talent. Yet those units consistently performed above expectations. His 2023 season with the Las Vegas Raiders stands out. That defense finished 9th in EPA per play, 11th in points per drive, and 17th in success rate. And when you look deeper at that roster, it becomes even more impressive. Outside of Max Crosby, there was no collection of elite stars. Still, Graham managed to field a top 10 level defense by maximizing roles, disguising coverages, and putting players in positions that fit their strengths. That trend follows him everywhere. His first year with the New York Giants came during a near-complete defensive rebuild. Many of the players from that roster are no longer household names, yet the Giants still produced a top 15 defense. That has been the defining trait of Patrick Graham as a play caller. He consistently punches above his weight. He adapts, adjusts, and refuses to force players into rigid systems that do not suit them. Now, for the first time in his career, Graham steps into a situation where the talent ceiling is undeniably higher. The Steelers' defensive front alone gives him a toolbox he has never had before. T.J. Watt, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, Derek Harmon, Keanu Benton, and the possibility of Cam Hayward returning form a front that can overwhelm offenses. On the back end, Joey Porter Jr. has already established himself as a true lockdown corner. Jalen Ramsey brings versatility and experience, particularly in the slot. Deshane Elliott adds physicality and leadership. Simply put, this is the most talented defense Patrick Graham has ever been asked to coordinate. What should excite Steelers fans most is Graham's flexibility. He is not married to one scheme. Over the years, he has deployed everything from aggressive cover 0 looks to press man cover 1, off-zone structures like cover 4 and cover 6, and hybrid match concepts depending on personnel. His defensive game plans change weekly, and his overarching scheme evolves year to year based on who is on the roster. That adaptability is something Pittsburgh has lacked. In recent seasons, the defense has been expensive and talented, yet often failed to fully justify that investment. The unit was rarely bad, but it frequently felt capped, predictable, and unable to adjust when things broke down. This is where the contrast becomes sharp. Under Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin, the Steelers fielded strong defenses that too often underperformed relative to their talent level. Graham's arrival signals a philosophical shift. The Steelers are betting that better schemes will finally unlock everything this roster can be. With a coordinator who builds around players instead of forcing players to fit a system, the ceiling rises dramatically. A top 5 defense in 2026 is no longer a stretch. It becomes a realistic outcome, and this is only one piece of the broader transformation. McCarthy is also reshaping the rest of the coaching staff. Adam Henrick has been hired as the wide receivers coach, replacing Zach Itzani. Henry brings a strong developmental background, having coached at LSU when Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry were there, and later working under McCarthy in Dallas during CeeDee Lamb's development. That hire alone hints at how serious the Steelers are about improving player growth on offense. At the same time, McCarthy is retaining select members from the previous regime. Linebackers coach Scott McCurley, quarterbacks coach Tom Arth, and secondary coach Gerald Alexander are all expected to return. Each retention has logic behind it. McCurley worked with McCarthy in Dallas. Arth has deep familiarity with McCarthy's quarterback development philosophy from Green Bay, including time spent with Aaron Rodgers. Alexander played a major role in defensive communication, which aligns with McCarthy's stated goal of keeping the language consistent while evolving the scheme under Graham. All of this points to one clear theme. The Steelers are trying to upgrade their schemes without tearing everything down. They want continuity where it helps and innovation where it was missing. That That balance is not easy to strike, but it is exactly how championship-caliber organizations operate. This is only the first phase of what McCarthy is building. The offensive coordinator decision still looms, and more staff moves are coming. But with Patrick Graham set to run the defense, the Steelers have taken a decisive step toward raising their ceiling on that side of the ball. After years of feeling like the defense left something on the table, Pittsburgh is finally putting a coordinator in place whose entire career has been about getting more out of less. So now, it's on you, Steelers fans. What do you think this defense can become under Patrick Graham, and do you believe this hire is the turning point the Steelers have been waiting for? What makes this moment even more important is how it fits into the larger picture of where the Steelers have been stuck for years. This franchise has hovered in that uncomfortable middle ground, good enough to compete, good enough to reach the postseason conversation, but not dynamic or flexible enough to truly threaten the league's elite. The defense, in particular, symbolized that problem. Heavy investment, recognizable names, star power at the top, but too often the same issues showed up when it mattered most. Predictable pressure packages, coverage breakdowns, and an inability to adjust once opponents figured out the plan. Patrick Graham's track record directly challenges that pattern. One of the biggest differences with Graham is how he approaches problem solving during the season. He does not treat the scheme as a finished product once week 1 arrives. His defenses evolve. If a player struggles in a role, he adapts the role instead of benching the player or forcing repetition. If an opponent exposes a weakness, he addresses it the very next week with alignment changes, coverage rotations, or front adjustments. That mindset alone represents a major departure from what Steelers fans have grown used to watching on Sundays. This is why the pairing of Mike McCarthy and Patrick Graham matters so much. McCarthy has been clear that he wants coaches who can elevate the talent already in the building. The Steelers are not entering a full rebuild. They are trying to break through a ceiling that requires coaches who understand both structure and flexibility, and Graham fits that profile almost perfectly. When McCarthy talks about taking the next step, this hire shows he means it in a tangible way, not just in press conference language. There is also an underrated leadership component here. Graham has coached under multiple head coaches, survived staff turnovers, and maintained respect in every building he has been part of. That matters in a locker room filled with veterans who expect accountability and clarity. Players respond to coordinators who can explain why adjustments are happening, not just demand execution. Graham's reputation around the league is built on communication and teaching, and that aligns with McCarthy's emphasis on clarity and consistency across the staff. The ripple effect could be significant. A more adaptable defense means fewer snaps spent reacting and more snaps dictating terms. That changes games. It shortens fields for the offense. It creates momentum. It also puts opposing quarterbacks under constant mental pressure, not just physical pressure. When a defense can look different pre-snap and post-snap, when it can alternate between aggressive looks and disciplined zone concepts, it forces mistakes. That is where turnovers come from, and turnovers are what swing playoff games. This also reframes expectations for the players themselves. Guys like TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith are already elite pass rushers, but Graham's history suggests he will find creative ways to free them up even more. Joey Porter Jr. becomes even more dangerous in a system that understands matchup-based coverage. The interior defensive line, often asked to do the dirty work without much recognition, could finally be unleashed in ways that create consistent disruption instead of just holding ground. This is not about reinventing players, it is about unlocking layers that were never fully explored. Zooming out, the Steelers' coaching overhaul now has a clear identity forming. McCarthy on offense, Graham on defense, targeted position coach hires, and selective retention of voices that support continuity. This is not chaos, it is construction. Every move so far connects to a broader philosophy, smarter football, better teaching, and maximizing what the roster already offers. For a franchise that prides itself on stability, this might be the most meaningful internal shift in years. Of course, none of this guarantees results. Schemes still have to translate to Sundays. Players still have to execute. Injuries, matchups, and in-season adversity will test everything being built right now. But what has changed is the sense that the Steelers are no longer standing still. They are actively trying to solve problems that have lingered for too long. That is why this moment matters beyond one coordinator hire. Patrick Graham represents a philosophical reset on defense, and Mike McCarthy represents a willingness to challenge old habits. Together, they signal that the Steelers are serious about closing the gap between being competitive and being dangerous. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe Patrick Graham is the right coach to finally unlock this defense? And do you think this coaching staff overhaul can push the Steelers into true championship contention? The coaching picture keeps getting clearer the more you zoom in, because Patrick Graham is only one piece of what is quietly becoming a very intentional rebuild of how football is taught and executed inside this building. When you connect the dots between the defensive hire and the other staff decisions already in motion, you start to see that Mike McCarthy is not just assembling familiar names, he is constructing a staff that speaks the same football language while still bringing different perspectives into the room. That balance shows up clearly in the decision to retain Gerald Alexander in the secondary. One of the most frustrating issues for the Steelers over the past few seasons was communication breakdowns on the back end, especially when offenses shifted tempo or motioned late. Alexander was heavily involved in managing those communications, and McCarthy has already emphasized that he wants to keep the defensive language as consistent as possible. That matters because Patrick Graham is known for disguising coverages and rotating responsibilities. Having a coach who already understands how to keep those moving parts aligned is critical if this defense is going to play fast instead of thinking the same logic applies on offense, even though McCarthy will be calling plays himself. The offensive coordinator role, while still open, is clearly being viewed as a complementary position rather than a competing voice. The names being discussed all share one common trait: familiarity with McCarthy's system and an emphasis on development. Whether it ends up being Lunda Wells, Alex Van Pelt, Luke Getsy, Scott Tolzien, Ben McAdoo, or even Anthony Lynn, the pattern is consistent. These are coaches who understand structure, quarterback development, and situational football, not just play design. That matters because the Steelers are not chasing gimmicks, they are chasing efficiency. McCarthy's offense has always been built on clarity for the quarterback, defined reads, and attacking matchups. Pair that with a defense under Patrick Graham that is designed to steal possessions, and suddenly the formula becomes very clear. This team wants to control games mentally as much as physically. Another underrated element here is how these hires signal accountability. Coaches like Graham and Henry have reputations for being teachers, but also for being demanding. They are not passive. They expect players to understand the why behind the scheme. That changes the dynamic in meeting rooms and on practice fields. When players buy into the teaching, execution follows more naturally on Sundays. That is often the difference between a defense that looks good on paper and one that consistently delivers results. This is also why the idea of Pittsburgh being a top 5 defense is not unrealistic anymore. It is not just about talent, and it never really was. It is about alignment between coaching, philosophy, and player skill sets. For years, the Steelers leaned heavily on individual brilliance to cover schematic limitations. Now, for the first time in a while, it feels like the scheme might actually amplify that brilliance instead of containing it. There will still be questions, of course. How quickly can Graham install his system while keeping terminology familiar? How will McCarthy balance play calling with overseeing an entirely new staff? How aggressively will the Steelers adjust personnel to match these schemes moving forward? Those answers will